can you do this? I'm like, just shut up and get over here. She was like, okay.
Yeah, Eva told me the story about the fun girls' night.
Fun times.
How's it healing?
The swelling's gone way down, so I'm very happy about that. And the guy was like, it's very rare that you don't need surgery. And I'm like, well, I've torn both my ACLs. Is that a factor? And he's like, no.
Corey, nice to meet you.
Golly.
I know.
It's a pleasure.
They said it should heal naturally, so that's what we're hoping for.
Well, good.
It's just like, when it starts feeling better, then you start doing more. And then it's like,
Yep, and then it gets really sore.
yeah.
And it's like sore in a way that's like, that's not good sore. That's, I hurt myself.
Just stop and ice it and elevate it.
But it's so good to meet
No, it doesn't hurt. Hi, Mary.
So I came to.
Hi, nice to meet you as well, Kelly.
First time I passed through. I don't know what it is, but yes.
You can see my gentleman being a certificated doctor.
Okay. I'll just introduce you.
I'm Jenny. DJ for a bajillion years.
Alrighty. Does everybody have a pamphlet or a handout? Everybody has one of those? And then something to write on. You don't need to worry about that right now, but in a little bit we'll break out and you'll have some opportunities to write. Kelly, do you have something to write on?
No.
It's okay. We got extras.
I was told to just bring myself.
Well, that's the most important thing, and you did that. So, all right. Well, we'll get started here in just a second, but I want to pray for us before we get started. Father, I just thank you for our church. I feel blessed that we get to have this space on a Saturday morning and spend some time doing this work. I know that that's not always given. And I just thank you for that. I thank you for the people that are willing to show up and be here, God. I thank you for the ways that you are moving and working in our church and in our lives, God. I pray that this morning would be full of your work, Father. I pray that you would be active in our minds and our words and the ways that we are relating to each other and the ways that we're learning, God. I pray that we would know more of your love for us, that we would know more of your work in other people's lives, and God, we would see ways that you're calling us to healing, to purpose, God. I believe that you have that in store for all of us, and Father, we just ask for the thing that I believe you've promised us, God, that you want to give us, God, and so we ask you for it. We pray that you would do that this morning. Also, in your son's name we pray. Amen. All right, so welcome to the StoryGroup Workshop. I think this is our third. Is that right? Our third? Fourth?
What is it?
I was going to say annual, and it's not even annual. We do it twice a year. This is at least our third, maybe fourth, workshop, and we've been doing story groups for about 4 years at this point. And story groups and story work are not something that we invented necessarily. Dan Allender is an author who he has a school in Seattle for the School of Psychology and Theology where he trains counselors, he trains trauma therapists, he trains even pastors to be informed about what this work is kind of about. And out of one of his books where he wrote about doing this for you as an individual, we kind of figured, how can we do this in our church? How can we do this in a way that blesses the people of our church, but also like takes advantage of the community of a church, a place where people are called to share each other's burdens, where people are called to come together and let the Holy Spirit work in such a way that brings healing and brings purpose. And so we started out one version of that 4 years ago, and it's really changed a lot as we each semester asked ourselves, what do we like about it? What do we want to do more of? What do we want to do less of? And we've really kind of zeroed in on this thing that you're going to have an opportunity to learn about and do this morning, which is what we call story work. You're going to learn how to write a story, and then you're also going to get an opportunity to share it in a group, which is, to me, as we did this each semester, and I think all of our leaders would echo this, that's really the sweet goodness of this work, is writing out that story and then sharing it in a group, and the opportunity to let God speak into that, let other people speak into that. And you'll get to experience that in a little bit, and hopefully you'll be hooked just like we all were when we started doing this. Those stories are what make up your life. Dan Allender says, you are a story. I like that. I think that's an interesting way to frame this. But not just one story, not just one kind of moral arc of neatly put together, this is the beginning and middle and end, but thousands of stories, maybe even hundreds of thousands of stories of these little memories, these little places that stick with you as far as being important, whether that's because they're meaningful and they exemplify something good about your life, something beautiful about your life, or possibly even something that was particularly painful, loss, abuse, hurt. All of those stories are there. They're in your memory for a reason. They're important. They make up who you are. And I think inherent in what we do in this story work is that we believe that that purpose that you believe about those stories changes how you live your life. The problem is sometimes we can believe things that are untrue about those stories. We can believe that story is really about my shame. That story is really about how I'm not worthy. That story is about how I get rejected all the time, and that's destined to happen again. Because that's the thing. These stories aren't just in your past; they're directing your steps as you move forward in your life. And so, the goal of story work is to go back to those places, to open up the doors to some of these places. And some of those, to be honest, some of those stories in my life, I had shut the door on. I didn't want to share anymore. In fact, part of my survival was to not look at those stories. They're painful. Those were back closet doors that I didn't want to open again. And God invites us to go back there, to open those doors. I'm going to talk a little bit, well, I might even just talk about it now, just a little bit of a smaller group, and hopefully we can be a little bit conversational about this. The story of the woman at the well, many of us are familiar with that. There's a place in the Bible where Jesus comes to a well at noon, or in the middle of the day, and meets a woman there. Part of what happens in that story, so one, I think that story is beloved. I think people really love that story. And if I had to put my finger on why I think that's true, is because I think it shows something of the character of Jesus that is really attractive. He loved that woman well, but also was bold in helping her open up about some of the brokenness that she was dealing with in her life. So they're there at noon, which is a time when you go to the well if you're trying to avoid being around other people, essentially. And so Jesus is there. He's a man. He's also a Jewish man. And he asks this woman to get him a drink of water. One, it was breaking some social rules for him to directly talk to a woman. It was also breaking some social rules for him, a Jewish man, to talk to her, a Samaritan woman. She even spoke up about this in the story. She knew her rung on the class ladder. She was a woman. She was also a Samaritan woman. And then she also has this kind of hiddenness that she's coming to the well with. So she knew, hey, who are you to be asking me and talking to me about this? You're not, I'm supposed to be beneath you, sort of, essentially is the implication. And he starts talking to her, and he says something to the effect of, why don't you ask your husband to come? Or why don't you go tell your husband? I think Jesus knew her situation was that she did not have a husband. She actually had multiple men that she was sleeping with or being with. And she says, well, I don't have one husband. I actually have 5. Is kind of her way of choosing to answer that. And to me, that moment is a moment where he sort of asks her, do you want to talk about it? I want to go there, but not if you don't want to. And she opens up. She's like, yep, here's the deal, And so they go there. That's when I was talking about the closed doors, the boxes that we put away and that we hope to never open again. Those are those doors. And he asks her, do you want to go there? And when she does, he speaks clearly about the truth about that situation. Her life has changed. By the end of the story, she's in the streets proclaiming the gospel, saying, come meet this man who knows everything about me, And so I interpret that as she moved from that place being brokenness and something that she oriented her life around, in that she hid it from everyone. And then by the end of it, it became something she's talking about in the streets. I mean, this is one conversation. He took that pain, that brokenness, and then offered healing, and then not just healing, but purpose. Like through that brokenness, she had purpose. She had a voice in this village, in this place where she could go and help other people. And so in a nutshell, that's what we're looking to do in the groups in this work, is to open the doors to some of those places, to let God speak into that. And sometimes we have our guard up, right? Because I might hear that really is very broken, or that is a story about how I messed up or how I missed the mark, And Jesus doesn't shy away from saying, yeah, it is broken. but he calls you to something better, and he actually takes that broken thing and turns it into something beautiful. Many times he also says, you don't need that shame. I'm taking that shame away from you. I'm going to relieve the burden of that shame that you, for this woman, obviously had shaped her life. She was hiding actively from people in her community because of that shame. And so, yeah, kind of in a nutshell, or maybe in a broad way, that's what story work is all about. 3 things that I want you to know that I believe happen if you do this work, if you do story work. So when I say do story work, I mean that could be in your life individually, whether that's in your prayer time with God, that could be with your spouse, that could be in your life group or a core group if you have any of those. Those are places to do this kind of work. And obviously it's going to happen in story group. We're going to be doing that in about a week after today to start our story groups for this semester. 3 things that I believe will happen if you do that work. 1, I think you'll receive healing. There's places in our lives that we have grief and pain that we never resolved. That when that event happened, it was incredibly packed with emotion and pain and grief. And to survive, we had to kind of move on without dealing with all of that. Sometimes that's because you're a kid and you don't have the tools to be able to grieve and to face that pain and to work through that stuff. And you didn't have somebody in your life to come alongside you and say, hey, let's open up, let's talk about this, process that. Sometimes that's because the pain was just so great. We didn't know what to do with it. Or we're a parent and we're taking care of our kids. We have to think about them before we think about having the space to emotionally deal with what we've been through. And so the goal of story work is, part of the goal of story work is to go back to those places, to give yourself the gift of being able to process those things and grieve those things, face the pain of those things. So one thing that I believe you'll experience is healing. Something else I believe you'll experience is that you will stop reenacting past harm. A little bit of what I was saying before, another way of saying what I was saying before is that the harm and the pain that we have been through isn't just in the past. There's a quote that I didn't write down, but it's that the past, it hasn't passed, or the past isn't dead, it hasn't even passed. And what that means is everything that is from your past is actively a part of what you're doing from day to day, whether you consciously think about it or not. But every interaction you have with another person is built on all the building blocks of interactions you've had in your past, especially the prominent ones, the ones that were difficult and hard, or the really good things, the places where you experience trust and vulnerability and goodness. Those are all active in the ways that we're living out our lives day to day now. And so the second thing that I believe that you'll experience is that you'll stop reenacting past harm. The third thing is that this is the best way, I believe, for you to understand the kingdom purpose that you have in your life. When I say kingdom purpose, I mean that God calls us to have a purpose. It's partly because he loves us, and it's partly because he loves the world around us. He has designed you, he has created you, he longs to work in your life such that you have a unique purpose that blesses other people and that brings you fulfillment and satisfaction. Man, that gets me so excited to learn ways that he's doing that in my life more and more, but to also see other people get to learn that about their life. To see, oh, this isn't something I'm just trying to forget or just trying to survive with having happened to me. This is actually a core part of his plan for me and how to bless other people and to see other people live full lives. So that happens here in Story Group. That is a deep, good thing that I think the church, that happens here at church, that happens in life groups, that happens in core groups, but it definitely happens here in Story Groups, and I think it's a uniquely good way to accomplish that. So there's a study in the 80s, that started in the 80s, called the ACE study. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Secular is not a Christian study, but it was essentially they took around 20,000 kids, and that had been sexually abused as children. So under the age of 12, they were sexually abused. And they, for 20 years, followed those children. So I said 20,000. It was 20 years. I think it was 3,000 kids for 20 years. So a little bit smaller number. 3,000 children for 20 years. They studied them for 20 years, checked in with them, got data from them over those 20 years, and studied the effects of that trauma in their lives. They didn't intervene. They didn't give them connected to counselors. They didn't do anything other than study and check in with where those kids were. And over those 20 years, they found a lot of stuff. There's tons of information and data out there that I think is really interesting about that study. But one of the things that I want to highlight this morning is they grouped those kids into two groups. Not every person fit into the two groups, but many of the people fit into two groups. One group was a group of people whose lives were absolutely marked by that abuse still, 20 years later. They had disrupted relationships. Maybe it was difficult finding a career or a job to keep, maybe addictions, that kind of thing. So you could directly tie some of the disruption in their life back to that abuse still, 20 years later. The second group is people who that wasn't necessarily true. You couldn't tie their lives back to that abuse. There was satisfaction in their relationships, there's satisfaction in their job, there's satisfaction in their kind of stability in life. And they wanted to see what could we see possibly that would correlate being in one of those groups or the other. And one of the things they found was, did those people over those 20 years have people that believed them and that they could talk to about it? That could be a counselor, that could be a parent, that could be a friend, that could be a church group. But do you actively have people in your life that believed you when you said, this was awful, that I'm struggling right now? And do you have people that you're regularly talking to about that? And to me, and again, this is a secular study, but to me, that speaks to something about how we've been created, how God has created us, that we are designed to be in community, that our lives are supported even through trauma like that. Can you imagine sexual abuse as a child? One of the most disruptive things that can ever happen to a person, that even in that he is designed so that community can bring healing, that community can be a place where you can process that, deal with that, and let it be something that you get healed from, and that becomes a part of your life, not that you just cut out and that you forget about, but no longer disrupts and no longer brings that pain and difficulty. So I always loved thinking about that and how story groups work and how we come together as a group to be intentional about being safe, about being good listeners, being good at being the place where we believe each other and hear each other out. So in just a second, we're going to have two things I'm really, really excited about. One of those is Mary is going to come up and share one of her stories. So Mary is one of our leaders, and she has been through StoryGroup herself, and then has also been through a semester of apprenticing, leading, and she's going to share one of the stories that she shared in her story group. And so you'll get to hear one of the three stories that we go through in the group. Those three stories are a story of shalom, a story of shalom shattered, and a story of shalom sought. Those kind of come from Dan Allender's original work, but they are a three-story arc that help us as far as direction, but those are not the only kind of stories that you can tell. There's all kinds of different stories that you can tell. But she's going to come and share a story of shalom, so you'll get to hear her share that. We're going to talk about it a little bit after she's done. I think that's a really cool exercise. We get to hear like a real version of that. And then the second thing is you're going to have some time to go and be quiet and write out a story based on a prompt that we give you here in the notebook. And we'll be here available to help you with that. But then after that, we're going to come together and share those in a group and reflect on those things together. The prompts that we're giving you today are intentionally a little less deep than you might expect from the way I've been kind of setting this up. That's sort of intentional. We want to make sure that we're staying safe in what we're sharing today, that we're not diving all the way in. But we also want you to get to experience something very real and very tangible about what story work is about. I want to quickly, I'm kind of want to make sure that I'm being on time today, but I want to talk quickly about the story of the prodigal son. So this is a story that Jesus tells to his disciples and to a mixed group of people, Pharisees included, but also people who felt connected to his message and wanted to hear the gospel of how God wanted to save them. And so he's speaking to these different groups, and I love I mean, obviously, but I love that Jesus used storytelling as a way to teach and to welcome people into a story of how he loves them, about how his father loves them. And in the story of the prodigal son, many of us know that. I mean, it's one of the most popular parts of the Bible. This son comes to his father and says, I want my inheritance, which essentially is saying, I'm treating you as if you're already dead. That's because that's normally when you get the inheritance. He says, I want the whole thing now, early. He didn't have any right to it, but he says, I want it. And the father says, okay, and he gives it to him. Then the son goes off and is incredibly irresponsible with that money. Spends it on parties and lavish lifestyle in the city, it says. And he comes back, and that's what we're going to start reading, is when the son has spent all of his money. Famine has struck the land. It is a stressful time where he is no longer reaping the benefit of having all this money that he didn't earn. And he is actively eating the food that the pigs are eating, and working at a farm, and realizing, the servants at my father's house have it even better, or have it better than I am. I'm going to go towards my father, as sort of the choice he makes. But he believes he's going to ask his father to be a servant, because that would be better than where he was at. Verse 18 says, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his fingers and sandals on his feet. There's so much here. There's so much goodness in the story about the character of God and how he wants to treat us. But the first thing I want you to notice is that the son made a move towards his father. He thought it was a move to be a servant and to kind of apologize and to become a servant. He was wrong about that. That's not what the father was going to do. But at least it was a move towards his father, right? So you don't have to get it right. You don't have to know exactly what's going to happen. But I think the beginning of the story in these different places in our lives is to make a move towards the Father. The second thing is, you can tell he's coming with a lot of shame. He screwed up. He knows it. But you can hear the shame in his voice. You can hear the heaviness of that burden in how he is approaching his father. I love that, and I didn't learn about this until later in life, but that the father sees him from a long way off. Probably means he was watching. The father hikes up his robe and runs to him. And in Jewish culture, that's embarrassing. The father just embarrassed himself. You don't run, you don't pull up your robe. And he's running to his son. And I love that picture. As a dad myself, I love the idea of being embarrassing because I love my kids. There's something about that that's very dad-like, and I love the picture that the God of the universe is doing that for us, right? And the second thing is, the son says, here's who I am. I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am not worthy to even be a servant in your home. And the father brushes that off immediately. And he says, get him a robe, get him a ring, put sandals on his feet, that my son is returned. He says, this is who you are. You are my son. Story work is something about identity as well. It's the work of, what do you believe about your story? What do you believe about these stories and what they say about who you are and your worth, whose you are, whom you are? And I think God is eager. He's waiting to see you make a move towards him. And he wants to run to you and say, you're my son. You're my daughter. You have worth in my kingdom. And we might say, but, I have screwed up so many times. I've fumbled what you've given me so many times. Don't you know what I just did? He blows through that. He barely paid attention to his son saying, this speech. You can tell he like practiced the speech. He's like, okay, I've sinned against heaven, okay, and I'm not worthy to be a servant. And he blows through it. He just doesn't even care. He says, you're my son. So I think part of story work is letting God speak to you about who you are, what your identity really is. We can believe lies about that. Some of you might be aware of that already. You might understand that I believe lies about who I am. If you don't, part of story work is discovering that. But if you do, part of story work is what does it look like to really banish those lies, to really take the truth and put it into those stories and let God speak into that place. I also think something important to point out is, as a father also, there's a part of the story that doesn't make sense to me, or I feel like I would act differently. The son says, give me my money, and he goes away. He's away for a long period of time. Nowhere in the story does it say the father went out to look for him. The father tried to call him up. Well, my version would be the father calls him up and tries to convince him, hey, this is a bad idea. You shouldn't be doing this, He doesn't do that. That feels hard to me as a parent. Like I want my kids to make good decisions. I want good things for them. And if they're making bad decisions, it's hard to let that happen. But I think what God is demonstrating here is something called boundaries, essentially. You are able to make your own decisions about whether or not you choose to love him, whether or not you choose to let him change your life or not. He gives you that choice. The whole universe, I think, is ordered around that choice. The reason we have brokenness in the world is because you can choose to love God or to not love God. But that also means that we have to move towards him. That has to happen first. You all are here this morning. I believe that's a move towards him. Writing out these stories, you're constantly going to be faced with that choice to move towards him and to be honest about those things, to be open about those things, to be real with even anger towards him, even frustration with him. I believe all of those are moved towards him in a way that he responds to. He comes running. So I love that story for a lot of different reasons, but one of them is the way that I think it applies to what we do here with story work. Okay, Mary, why don't you come on up and we get to hear your story. There you go. No, you don't have to push anything. It should come on all by itself. I don't think it did. Here. No, it's not your fault. We're trying to record this so we can send it out to a couple folks who weren't able to come, and then also have it for posterity. There you go. All right, Mary, so you're going to be reading a story of Shalom. And if we were in group together, we would all be focused on her story, wanting to listen and even take notes of what sticks out to us. You don't necessarily have to do that this morning because you're not going to be discussing it, but if you're thinking about how this works in a story, that's what we would be doing. So thank you, Mary. It really is a blessing that you are willing to do this. There's some vulnerability in that, sharing a story of yours. And I haven't actually heard the story, so I'm excited to hear it for the first time. So,
awesome.
Whenever you're ready,
All right.
ready for you to go.
All right. I loved a good Saturday. A good Saturday was when my brother, my dad, and I would have fun all day. My mom worked long hours over the weekend, so for many years we would just be the three of us. A good Saturday in my book was when we were promised fun on Monday, and then we'd ask on Wednesday, and then Friday, and then the joy after quietly watching Saturday cartoons, my dad would come downstairs and say, let's go to the park. When the weather was nice, we'd go to the park, which in our language was called Jouajoué in Amharic. We would be so excited saying, we're going to Jouajoué, we're going to Jouajoué. You would think we'd be told that we went to Disney. Sometimes we brought our bikes, sometimes we brought a ball, but sometimes the best part was just ourselves. On one particularly beautiful day, we got there early enough to beat all the crowds and have a goalpost all to ourselves. I was never athletic, and I still am not, and yet I had so much fun tussling and wrestling the ball between our dad. He was a big guy, obviously, bigger than me and my brother combined, but we would team up and steal the ball from under him, sometimes cheating and tackling our bodies over him. Sometimes we'd also put all of our weight on my dad's arm and tire him out that way. That day, he taught us the way that you can make a goal is to trick the goalie, as if you're going left and then feinting to the right and then kicking straight. So after an hour of tussling and hustling about, he would let us go to the playground. I would chase and be chased by my little brother, and right next to it there was an old school train where we would clamber inside and pretend to be conductors, ticket masters, passenger, every role you can think of. After all that, we went to the swings where our dad could see us, and then he would keep pushing us higher and higher and higher until we think we'd almost jump off. By that time, you could see the sound of our own laughter as well as kids who had came with their parents on the playground. Today was a really, really good Saturday. He let us venture further down into the park and he even gave us money for ice cream. I thought my heart would burst from so much joy. After spending the most of the day out, he said, "You guys want to go to Chicken Coop?" Chicken Coop? Really? We squealed. Chicken Coop was a mom and pop shop in the side of Charlotte that had special fried chicken, tater tots, all you can name it in a box. Normally my mom would leave some food in the fridge for us, but sometimes we'd go out for Chicken Coop. So we got across to get our meal, and then we brought it to our favorite bakery near Plaza in downtown. And they would let us, for just the price of a small coffee from my dad, eat our food from outside. So we would all devour our food. I remember negotiating with my brother, "I'll trade you a hush puppy for a coleslaw," and vice versa, and we'd scarf the food down as if we had never eaten before. I was so happy in this day, my dad's laugh booming larger than life. Everything was perfect.
Thank you. How do you feel? You're up here in front of some people and sharing your story of a long time ago, but I see you smiling a lot.
Yeah, I feel really good. I haven't touched this story in a minute, and the good memories, like it came flooding back.
Yeah. It's so personal. I think something I want to point out is that a story of Shalom it doesn't just touch on general goodness, it touches on goodness in you. The ways that you enjoyed your family, the ways that you enjoyed that day, speak to something about who you are. I imagine one of those things is that you love your family. You can hear it in this little girl's delight in her father and her brothers, but also how you played to it. I think it's really interesting that there's this very physical play in the story, and your dad's in it. You know, he's like kind of wrestling with you or playing games with you. There's also adventure in this story too, which is something that kids get, I think. We as adults maybe kind of lose a little bit. A lot of times our story of Shalom are stories about being a kid. And, when Jesus talks about that we need to be like children, it's hard to understand exactly what he means by that, but I think it's something, when you hear a story of Shalom, you can see that. There's like something that kids get that we forget as adults in some ways. That joy, that pure joy, some of that adventure. Anything stands out to you differently reading it today than a couple of months ago?
I guess a sense of place more. The first time I was more focused on my dad and my brother, but especially I'm from Charlotte and I've been here, but a lot of those landmarks are no longer here. Like Chicken Coop's no longer here, Nova's Bakery is no longer here. The park is still there, but it's not the same. So
yeah.
It gave me a positive and also some sadness of all those things I remember growing up. It's not quite the same.
It's good. Something that Mary did really good in this story is you get that sense of place. You understand some of the things that are happening. You can kind of see some of the sights. She also did a good job of outlining the characters here, the people that are in the group. So we're going to there's some instructions in here, and you'll hear it throughout the group. Part of story work is the emotional work, the relational work of story work. Part of it is also learning how to write in a way that fits this kind of format. And so part of what she did well was the setting, the characters there. She used some really good emotional language to describe her feelings. A really important goal that you have when it comes to writing a story is you want the people who you're telling the story to, you want them to get an understanding of what it's like to be you in that story, what you felt. That could be smells, that could be sights, that could be music, Certainly that's going to be emotions, the ways that you felt. Even feelings you don't understand, and actually, maybe I'm going to underline that. Feelings you don't understand might be the most important feelings for you to record, because those speak to a deeper truth that maybe hasn't kind of been pulled out into the light yet. And so this is a really, really good example of a story of shalom. There's so much beauty. I think it's a reflection of the ultimate shalom of heaven, of being with God in a place where things are perfect relationally, things are perfect in what we get to do and enjoy. And the group is a springboard off of into the other stories that we're going to share. So Mary shared a story of shalom shattered in her group. And there's ways that story you reference back to the story of shalom and like, oh, I can see why this hurts in this story because it was so beautiful in this story. It was something so wonderful here. And so that's kind of how some of that story arc goes. So thank you, Mary. We are all blessed that you shared your story with us. So thank you. So last couple of things. So the next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to spend some time writing. I want to give you guys plenty of time to spread out. You can go to tables. You can go sit at a random chair if you want to. This room, we're going to keep it extra quiet, but Christy, Mary, Karen, David, and I will all be here. If you got questions, if you're struggling with something, we'd love to help in any way we can. If you go through your packet here, the second page are 3 prompts. These are the 3 prompts we want to encourage you to think about writing a story about. We chose these intentionally because they're real. They're about something real from your life. But like I said, we're not diving all the way into the deep end yet. So a story about a family pet. What does that look like in your life? Maybe there's a story that you can remember. I would encourage you to write a story that sticks out to you, that's like in your memory. You know what I mean? Something you remember specific parts about. We're not looking for a 30,000-foot view where it's like, we had a dog and he lived for 15 years and I went off to college. We want maybe a day with that dog. Maybe a moment, the moment when your dad said, yes, you could go get the dog or whatever it might be. Or the time the dog ran away and it was really scary. Or, but we want on the ground, moment in time view of a story, not a larger picture of a story. So a story about a family pet, a story about a family vacation. Obviously that's going to be a specific moment in time. So when you're thinking about those stories, just make sure, it's a moment in time it's kind of an on the ground view of that. It could really be, we've had stories that are literally a moment or two, but there's enough there that it's a story. And then a nothing story. This is one that we've included. It's a little bit harder to explain, but essentially it's a story where other people in the story would not ever remember that moment, but for some reason for you, it's there. My version of that story is a ride back from my grandfather's house. It was a 7-hour drive, and it was we did it probably 5 times a year. And I guarantee you my mom and my sister don't have any memory of that day specifically. And for me, there's these moments that stick out. And I wrote about that, and there was meaning in that, there was purpose in that, or there's goodness in that. So, a nothing story. Couple of tips on the next page. Keep it specific. That's what I was trying to say, a moment in time, on the ground view of your story. Things to include, details of your age, location, the people there, sensory descriptions, hear, smell, taste, feel, see. A lot of times what you can do is write the story out and then go back and ask yourself, did I do these things? Is there the sense of what I heard and smelled and tasted and felt and saw here? Feelings, do I have enough emotions describing what it felt like to be me in this story? A couple things to resist the urge to preface, to kind of frame it and say, well, this is really a story about, a larger story where my dad did this or didn't, don't worry about that. That's important. I'm not dismissing the importance of that, but for today, for story work, we want to stay specific in the story and let that be what it is. Resist analysis, resist kind of trying to moralize or say this story is about this or something like that. You don't need to do that. That's actually kind of freeing, I think, a little bit to me when I think about writing a story. Is that it doesn't have to be about something necessarily. It doesn't have to have a larger moral story to it. It's just what I remember. It's just what's there. Resist the urge to add a follow-up or contextualize when you start to read it with your group. That's something that we have seen is an urge a lot of times, is when you've written it out and then you sit down and you're like, well, I should maybe give some context to this or something like that. Don't worry about that. Don't feel the pressure to do that. The whole goal here is going to get to that memory, to get to that story, write it down, and then to use that. Next page is an emotions wheel. Sometimes I would say I struggle with this, and most people struggle with this, which is sort of a vocabulary to describe all the emotions we feel. It can be surprising to look at this wheel and to think that you probably have felt all of these emotions this year, every single one of these on this wheel. It's wild. There's so many varied things that you can be feeling. And so these are good words to describe that stuff. So yeah, we're going to spend, so let's see, right now it is 10:01. We're going to spend until, well, for the next 25 minutes, we're going to spend writing our stories. Do y'all have any questions before we launch out into that as you're thinking about it? Anybody? All right. Well, Kelly, we'll get you a notebook. Huh? Yeah.
I just want to say,
Yeah.
some of us are writers, some of us are not. You know, like it's not about being a writer or writing like any specific way. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be eloquent, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to just present your story. You know, that's all we're looking for.
I am not a writer.
And sometimes people get caught up in that. So
Yeah, that's right. I've been in groups with people who are really good writers. Christy, for example, is a really good writer.
Mary's story is beautiful.
Mary's story is beautiful. And like, I think,
Oh my gosh, I just want to be there.
I know, I want to go. I'm so sad that Chicken Coop doesn't exist anymore. Yeah.
Sounds good.
But something exciting to me about StoryWorks, this is definitely down the list of benefits of being in a story group, but is that I've gotten to grow in how I can write and how I can be good at connecting what is in my head with being able to communicate it well in a way that's attractive and really conveys the goodness or the pain of a story. And that's a cool thing that happens in this process, is you get to get better at that. And I think that shows up more than just in writing. I think that shows up in how we speak about our lives and the things that we've been through and how we hear other people's stories too. So, okay, all right, well, let's break. Let's say 10:30. I'll give you a 5-minute warning, but 10:30 is when we're going to come back and get at some tables. So spread out, go find a place. Oh.
And if you're struggling with anything or have questions,
Yep.
just come find one.
We will all be around.